Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Ecclesiastes Class. For those of you joining us online, we pray God's blessings on you. We're entering into the Christmas season. We're just going through a Thanksgiving season. We pray that you're blessed and that your families are blessed and that the people in your lives are blessed and are searching for Christ. And we hope that this class may help you. Our class today is Ecclesiastes. That's class number 10. And we're going to be finishing off chapter 7. We didn't quite get through it last week. And then we'll be doing chapter 8 this week. So that's the plan. Let's start out with verse 21. So if you're at home, please open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes and chapter 7, verse 21, and we'll start there. And I'll read that. I'll read 21 and 22, and then we'll talk about those first. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. So Solomon, this is from Solomon, and Solomon is telling us that it's important for us to have excuse me. It's important for us to have a healthy sense of our own introspection, of just looking at ourselves internally. It's important for us to just understand that we aren't perfect, that we make mistakes. As we look at the people around us, it's important for us to understand that they make mistakes too. And it's easier for us to see their mistakes sometimes than it is to see our own mistakes. I'm sure none of us have that problem. Well, it's easy for us to see their imperfections, and we need to realize that we have them too, and we need to be patient with people around us with their imperfections. We need to lighten up. We need to take criticism in stride when people criticize us. And he mentioned specifically if we overhear our servant, now we don't have servants in our world today, but they did in those days. But if we hear someone around us criticizing us, maybe we should be happy that they don't know us any better, or they might have even more to criticize about us. Again, taking a healthy perspective on our own imperfection is important as we face the world. It gives us more patience. Almost everybody in the world is guilty, at least in their heart, of cursing other people or disliking other people. And so once we hear somebody dislike us and we get upset about that, again, let's have a healthy perspective on that. We're not perfectionists, or if we are perfectionists, and we shouldn't look at other people and expect them to be perfect. And if we are perfectionists, one of the things we learned, or we should learn in life, is that it's very, very difficult to be perfect yourself. None of us are. So perfectionists tend to have difficulties with being happy with themselves. Excuse me this morning. So that's verses 21 and 22. And I'm going to move on next to 23 through 25. All this I tested by wisdom. This is Solomon speaking again, right? All this I tested by wisdom, and I said, I am determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. Whatever exists is far off and most profound. Who can discover it? So I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, and to search out wisdom and the scheme of things, and to understand the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly. So over the last few weeks, we've been hearing Solomon talk to us about all the different things he's trying to think through under the sun here on earth. He's trying to think through all the different things that go on here under the sun, and he's trying to do it with earthly wisdom. Not this wisdom up here, not heavenly wisdom, but under the sun wisdom. He's trying to think it through with that, and it's very frustrating for him because a lot of it just doesn't make sense with under the sun wisdom. So here's a few examples. He says, I'm determined to be wise, but he figures out that he's never going to understand what's going on here on earth. Under the sun wisdom doesn't make sense. And it only makes sense if you have above the sun wisdom. So when he strictly tries to figure out what's going on earth with under the sun wisdom, he gets frustrated. So he says, I was determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. He couldn't figure it out. He's the wisest man who ever lived, and he can't figure out why things are happening the way they are here on earth, here under the sun. And he says, whatever exists is far off and most profound. Who can discover it? So he's saying that what happens here is so hard to understand. It's very profound. It's very deep. And even the best mind of man, the wisest mind of man, can't figure it out. It kind of leads us to think maybe we need to change our wisdom so that we're using heavenly wisdom above the sun wisdom. It says, I turn my mind to understand, to investigate, and to search out wisdom and the scheme of things. So he turned his mind and decided, all right, maybe I'm not really going to understand what's happening here on earth. So let me understand wisdom itself. And let me understand the scheme of things based upon what I can from my wisdom. He says, and to understand the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly. So he's thinking, all right, so at least I can understand the stupidity of evil. Why? Maybe I can at least understand why people do evil. Why would anybody be stupid enough to live their lives doing evil? And also the madness of folly. Remember, we studied the word folly last week. We looked up the biblical definition from Psalm 2. And the biblical definition of Psalm 2, as he's using it here, is not believing in God. So folly, as he's defining it here in this book, in the book of Ecclesiastes, is not believing in God. Now we think of folly as being just, errors, dumb things that people do. That's not how he's defining it. He's defining it as not believing in God. So he's calling it the madness of folly. So how mad it is for people to go through their lives not believing in God. I mean, I think we all know people that don't believe in God and that are just struggling in so many ways because of that. It's amazing once you believe in God and understand Him and understand about Him, how much simpler your life gets and just how much easier your life gets. Most of us in this room know that. And that's what we get by studying this book. This is our handbook as we try to understand God. This is the handbook He's given us to understand Him. So we try to understand Him, and the more we accept Him and understand Him, the less madness and folly there is in our lives. Questions on that? Let's move on then to, I did want to take a look at a passage. Actually, I want to look at two passages. Paul talks to us about explanations that are just very, very remote in Romans 11:33. So I'm going to go to Romans 11:33 first. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable His judgments and His paths beyond tracing out. So only God has the wisdom and the knowledge and the judgment to deal with everything from an up-here perspective. And as we try to understand how do we figure out what's going on earth and how do we make sense out of it, we can't just look at it with wisdom that people use down here. People who use earthly wisdom never get it. They never understand it. The only way to get it is to look at it, is to understand God's wisdom. And again, that brings us back to this book. It brings us back to the need to study God's wisdom and to understand what He's telling us. We're never going to have His mind. We're never going to understand it to the level that He understands it. But we will understand it to a level that is so much deeper than the people down here who are trying to figure it out with earthly wisdom. And then the other one I want to look at is in James 3:15. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. Actually, let me back up a couple of verses. Who is wise? I'm going to go back to verse 13 and start there. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. I'll go with one more verse too. He says, for where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. So James makes it clear that if we're just using this wisdom down here, we're going to get ourselves into all kinds of trouble. It's only when we use this wisdom up here that we really understand how to handle what's happening in our world and with the people around us and with God. Questions on that? Okay, let's move on to verses 26 through 29. Oh, let me say one more thing about that. He talked about the realm of the unknown, and I didn't cover that when I went through that a minute ago. There's so much in our lives that is unknown, that's unknowable. I mean, we have scientists that have spent years and years and years and years trying to understand things. And they get a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper, and they spend their lifetimes getting a little bit deeper into knowledge. But we never understand everything. There is so much knowledge out there that we don't know, and we just aren't going to know in our lifetimes. And we always have to come to terms with that. We have to come to terms with the fact that we can't know everything. Everything is not knowable in our world. And that's a tough one for us. You know, Solomon talks about that 3,000 years ago. We're 3,000 years later, and we still have tons of stuff that we don't know in our world. Talk to any scientist. He will tell you all the unknowable things, or unknown things at least, in his realm of science that people are trying to figure out today. There's still tons of things out there that we don't know. And this is 3,000 years after Solomon wrote these words. Interesting. Okay, now let's move on to 26 through 29. I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap, and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Look, says the teacher. By the way, teacher again is that word we saw, kohelet. That's what he calls himself here. The Hebrew word for teacher that Solomon uses is the word kohelet, which is a person who can call a convocation together. So, look, says the teacher, this is what I have discovered. Adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things, while I was still searching but not finding. I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. This only have I found, God created man upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes. There's a ton of stuff in here, so let's kind of crawl through this. First of all, he starts talking about he finds women can be a snare to him. Well, there's a reason that women are a snare to him that I'd like to focus on, and that's the fact that he had 1,000 sinful relationships going on with women in his life. And none of these women were good Jewish girls, right? These women were of two types. One were foreign princesses, which means they were pagans that he had married, so he had 700 wives. Imagine each one of them. You don't marry a princess, a king's daughter from someplace, without allowing her to bring in her idols into the palace, allowing her to bring in her priests into the palace, allowing her to bring in her altars into the palace, allowing her to do her sacrifices in the palace and her incense and all of that. You know, if you're marrying a king's daughter, you've got to allow this in your palace. So he did. He allowed it. So you got 700 princesses, and then the other were 300 concubines, which were women he wasn't married to, that he was just making love to. So he had 1,000 relationships, 1,000 sinful relationships with women, and he views women as a snare, as a trap. Well, let's think about where this is going, right? He's gotten himself trapped by doing this. By doing what he did, he got himself trapped. But who's he blaming for that? Is he blaming himself because he's the one who got 1,000 sinful relationships? Or is he blaming the women? He's blaming the women, right? He's blaming the women. Isn't that incredible how we take blame and put it off onto somebody else? He's claiming these women are snares and traps to him. Well, they are, but he's created the whole environment where this has happened. Now, interestingly enough, his first wife was Pharaoh's daughter. That's actually his queen, was Pharaoh's daughter. She's mentioned about 6 or 7 times in the scriptures, but she's always mentioned as Pharaoh's daughter. We don't get her name. We have no idea what her name is from the scriptures. So all we know is she's Pharaoh's daughter. She was his queen, his first wife. So she had a whole palace of her own built by him. We know that as well. She probably wasn't a good Jewish girl either, right? I mean, if she was, Pharaoh thinks he's a god. We were just in Egypt, and the pharaohs think they're gods in Egypt, or thought they were gods. So chances are Pharaoh's daughter wasn't exactly a good Jewish girl who was over there praising God. So his relationships with women, he thinks women are snares and traps, but his relationship really is the problem, is the fundamental problem underneath this whole situation. So he says, I find more bitter than death a woman who is a snare, and he had 1,000 of those around him, whose heart is a trap. He had 1,000 of those around him, whose hands are chains. So he's comparing himself to a slave, right? As though he's enslaved to these women. Who's really the slave here, right? Yeah. You know, these women get to see him once every 3 years or something, and yet they think they're married to him. They were sold on the idea that they were married to him, and yet he's a slave to them. Isn't that interesting? His perspective on this. That's definitely under the sun wisdom, right? That is not godly wisdom at all. But when I read this, I think, gosh, Solomon, don't you understand what your problem is here, right? Why do you think it's somebody else that's causing this problem? Then he goes on and says, the man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Very wise, right? If he had pleased God and done what was right, he wouldn't have gotten himself into this situation. But instead he chose sin, and now he's in the middle of this trap. He's got 1,000 women that are trapping him, and he doesn't know what to do about it now. He knows he made a mistake, presumably, but yet even then he's still not willing to blame himself for that mistake. He's blaming it on the ladies, the women. Questions on that? Then he says, look, says the teacher. Now again, the word teacher here is the Hebrew word kohelet. And kohelet, we studied way back in the very first class here. Kohelet is used, he describes himself in this book as being kohelet. It's Qohelet. I'll put that up here. That is the Hebrew word that's used here, kohelet, and it means it's translated here in the NIV as teacher. Probably a closer translation is a person who convenes an assembly. So that would be like a preacher or a teacher who convenes a religious assembly, is kohelet. So he is a teacher who convenes, or a person who convenes an assembly. He says, this is what I have discovered. Adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things, while I was still searching but not finding. So he's trying to discover something here, and he's trying to figure out what's the root cause of this problem. We're going to find in a minute. Initially he's going in the wrong direction. Later on he'll go in the right direction. He says, adding one thing to another. So he's just looking at things, trying to figure it out, trying to think it through, trying to discover the scheme of things, trying to discover what's going on underneath all this. Why is his life so messed up? Why is he seeing this? Why can't he understand things that he can't get to? While I was still searching but not finding. So he keeps searching, but he's not finding. How many people do we know in this world who are searching but not finding? I surely know a lot of them. I'm guessing most of us do. I have people in my family that are searching and not finding. I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. So he's looking at these 1,000 women again and saying, there are no upright women within 1,000. Okay, well, that's because he chose them to be in a sinful relationship with him. That's the reason they aren't upright women. So that part of it is correct, but it's not their fault. Well, it may be partially their fault, but it is his fault. And then he's going on from that and saying he found one upright man, so one righteous man among 1,000. So he's looking at all the people in his court, all the men that advise him. All the advisors would have been men in those days. All the men that advise him, and he's saying most of them are in it for themselves, right? They're in it to try to see what they can get or what influence or power or money they can get. He found one person in there that was really in it for him, to really do what was right for him and for the kingdom. So it's rare to find somebody, when you get to the halls of power and the centers of power where there's a lot of money and a lot of power, you tend to find people that are self-serving in there. I think we kind of, those of us that look at Washington, or I'm not picking on Washington, but any place, any capital, London, Beijing, whatever. When you look at people that are in any of those places, many of the people that try to get to the center of power are people that are in it for themselves. They are in it. Now, they may claim to be in it for the country, but they're in it to take care of themselves. And he sees that. He sees that of 1,000 men that are around him, only one is really in for the right reasons, which is interesting. He says, "This only have I found, God created man upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes." So he's going back now to the Garden of Eden, to the beginning. When God created man in the Garden of Eden, man was sinless, right? Man did not sin. Man had no sins. God created him. He gave him one temptation. Don't eat of the fruit of that tree over there. And guess what happened? They ate of the fruit of that tree over there. Now, Satan had a part in that. Satan tempted them into that. But ultimately, it was their decision to make. God had told them not to do it, and they did it. So God created us, our ancestors, to be righteous, to be upright. But our ancestors chose sin. And I remember when I was a kid thinking, gee, if that had been me in the Garden of Eden, I wouldn't have eaten that fruit. I don't think so. I think I probably would have too. I think all of us would have at some point. The nature of man is such that we will choose sin. And that's what God means to correct. But he means us to, that's part of the reason we are on earth, is to correct that tendency, to make that change, to make that decision for God while we're here on earth. So that instead of choosing sin, we are choosing God. That's the key reason he puts us here on earth. But they have gone in search of many schemes. So mankind, since the Garden of Eden, has gone in the opposite direction. They've gone in the direction of choosing sin rather than of choosing God. Questions on that? All right, let's move into chapter 8 now. I'm going to do just verse 1 first. Who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard appearance. So he's changing his thinking. He's changing what he's talking about now. He's talking about, he's talking about wise people. Who is like the wise? So he realizes that true wisdom, which is above the sun wisdom, heavenly wisdom, he realizes that true wisdom is about seeing our lives not from our perspective down here, but from God's perspective up there. Let me say that again. True wisdom is not about seeing our lives with the wisdom down here. It's about seeing our lives with the wisdom up there. That's a key thing we have to learn in life. That's true wisdom in life, is understanding our lives from that perspective instead of this perspective. The whole world is always telling us about this perspective. It's that perspective that we need to understand. Good, Solomon, you got that one right. You got that one right? Giving credit where credit's due, Solomon got that one right. Who knows the explanation of things? So who can explain things? Can anybody explain things? A person's wisdom, and he knows that it's hard to do that. With all of his wisdom, he studied that. He says a person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard appearance. So that's an interesting point. What he's saying is, when you are wise, when you have true wisdom, people see it in your face. Now he's thinking maybe of Moses, when Moses came out of the tent and his face was bright. But I think he's also thinking that when you have true wisdom, when you have above the sun wisdom, when you see the world from God's perspective, people can see it in you. We look like we are part of Christ's kingdom, and people see us and say, what does he have that I don't have? What's in him? How's he doing this? How's he coming up with that glow about him that says that he knows something that I don't know? And that's because we have wisdom that's up here, and that most people just have wisdom that's down here. So he's on a good point here in chapter 8, verse 1. He doesn't always hit good points, but he's on a good one here. Questions on that? Okay, let's move on now. Could you pass a copy of that down to Stephen, please, of the notes? Thanks. Let's move on to chapter 8, verses 2 through 4. I'll read you those next. This is Solomon speaking again. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, what are you doing? This is a really good one for us, especially around an election as we're having. One of the questions we always have in life is, we belong to God, but how do we deal with the authorities in life? How do we deal with government, kings? He calls it kings here, but we call it government today. How do we deal with the people around us? What level of respect do we give them? What level of loyalty do we give them? What do we do when they tell us to do something that's wrong? How do we deal with that? And he gives us, just in these 3 sentences, some pretty good advice on how to do that. And by the way, Jesus himself said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. In other words, if it's something that the king commands and it's okay to do it, go ahead and give it to him. If it's something that the king commands and it's not okay to give it to him, then don't. And that's kind of what we're going to see here. So he says, obey the king's command. So we have a responsibility as citizens to obey the command of our government. We have a responsibility to obey the law, as we would say it here in the United States. We have that responsibility. We took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. And then he says, do not stand for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. So what he's saying here is, we don't want to just run away from the king when he does something that's a little questionable. We'll see a lot of that with our government. We don't just want to run away and abandon the king at that point. It has to be something really serious for us to abandon the king and abandon our government. It says, do not stand for a bad cause. So if the government truly asks us to do evil, then we need to refuse that. We need to not do that. So do not stand for a bad cause. For he will do whatever he pleases. The government will do what it pleases. Most times they'll tell us to do things that are right, that are legal, and we obey those laws. But sometimes they'll tell us to do things that are wrong. And in those cases, we need to not do those.
But doesn't common sense play a factor in that?
Can you expand on what you mean? Can you expand on what you mean by common sense?
Common sense. The government says that you will do this and this is why.
Right.
And if you honestly don't believe that that's common sense.
Yeah, common sense is part of it. But that's an interesting question. That's a good question. Where does common sense come from? Where do we get common sense from?
As far as I'm concerned, I was born with it and brought up with it within my family realm.
Yeah.
Okay? And it was a taught thing within family.
Mm-hmm.
And not saying that my common sense is always correct,
Right.
but it's what I believe.
Would you say that common sense is more this kind of wisdom or more this kind of wisdom?
I would say it is above the sun.
Okay. So then it is godly wisdom. Common sense, as you're
Right.
defining it here, is godly wisdom. Common sense of don't step off the curb and get hit by a car is maybe more like under the sun wisdom. But common sense, as you're defining it, I think is more up here.
Right.
Right. Okay. Then yeah, I think so. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but why don't you ask your question again?
Just, I just, in my lifetime, I have met a lot of people who say, well, this is what the government says, so we have to do it.
Uh-huh.
And so my answer to that is, do you really believe that?
Yeah.
Do you really believe that within your soul?
Yeah.
And when the answer comes back as no, then I say, where's your common sense?
Mm-hmm.
Where is your common sense to tell you the difference between right and wrong, or what you believe is right or wrong?
Right. Yeah, if the speed limit sign says do 70 miles an hour, that's the law, and in theory we can get a ticket for not doing that.
Right.
common sense might say there's no police around, it's an open road, there's not a car within 20 miles, I can do 71 out here, right? Yeah, and it's so, you know, there might be, you might be able to get away with that, or there may be ice and snow all over the road, and you may say 70 miles an hour is crazy,
That's
I
right.
think I'll do 30. So, yeah, we have God gives us the ability to do that.
Warning in the fall,
Yeah.
there's black ice on bridges, so what do? We
We
slow
watch
down.
people spin out, yeah. I was driving the other day, and I saw 3 different people spin out. We were coming back from Indianapolis on Friday, and in the middle of that, it was weird. It was on and off, on and off, on and off, but under the bridges it was black ice.
Yep.
I saw 3 different people spin out on 69. All 3 of them hit the center, the New Jersey wall in the center. So yeah.
They were fortunate.
Yeah, first day of the year, first black ice of the year, time to learn, yeah. Yeah, common sense is part of it, obviously, and I think that, although some common sense might be down here, like before you step off the curb, look to the right and left.
Yes.
Some of it's up here too, you know, slow down when it's icy.
Yeah, look for buses.
Yeah. Other questions on that before we move on? Good question. I hadn't thought about common sense and how common sense fits into this concept until you mentioned that. He says, the king will do whatever he pleases. We see that with our government, right? Sometimes our government will do things that we know are wrong, but they'll do it because the people in power please to do that. They want to do that. What are we going to do? We can't oppose everything, but we can oppose the things that are really seriously challenging God. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, what are you doing? So we're certainly not going to be able to walk into the king's chamber and says, why did you issue that crazy order, right? Sometimes we do. John the Baptist did that. There are some people who do that, but not everybody will do that all the time. Sometimes we do. So it's just some of Solomon's ideas on how we deal with government that is doing things. A couple of things about the loyalty oaths. The loyalty oaths are actually in the Bible. It talks about loyalty oaths here. The king himself takes a loyalty oath to God. David did that, and Solomon did that. And then the leaders take a loyalty oath to the king. We see that in 2 different places. With David, it was in 2 Samuel 5, verses 1 through 3. Let me pull that out for you. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, we are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler. So he and the Lord he is making an oath to the Lord. When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a compact with them. So they're now going to make an oath to him at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. So when you become the leader in Israel, the king, you make an oath to the Lord, and the people around you make an oath to you. So that's how it worked in Israel. And we're going to look at Solomon. It's very similar what happened with Solomon. So this is how it worked there. Solomon's story is in 1 Chronicles 19, 23 through 24. I'm in the wrong place. I made a mistake here. It's 1 Chronicles 29, 23 through 24. Sorry about that. Then they acknowledged Solomon, son of David, as king a second time, anointing him before the Lord to be ruler, and Zadok to be priest. So Solomon sat on the throne of the Lord as king in the place of his father David. He prospered, and all Israel obeyed him. All the officers and mighty men, as well as all of King David's sons, pledged their submission to King Solomon. So again, he makes a commitment to God to be king. God says, you're king now. Then all of his people make a commitment to him. We do something similar. We take the Pledge of Allegiance. I remember taking that when I was a kid in school at a very young age, learning the Pledge of Allegiance, right? We take the Pledge of Allegiance to our nation. We pledge to follow what our nation wants, as long as it's righteous, right? Questions on that before we move on? Okay, let's move on to verse 5. In verse 5, whoever obeys his command, that's the king's command, will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. So if we obey the king's command, the king's going to be fine with us, right? If we obey the law, the king's going to be fine with us. So that's certainly true. And a wise heart, that's what we're talking about here, a heart with wisdom up here, a wise heart. A wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. So the wise heart will help us understand when we need to follow what the government wants us to do, or what the king wants us to do. That's the wisdom of our heart. Pretty simple one. Let's move on now to verses, I'm on a different page actually. Verses 6 through 8. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter. Though a person may be weighed down by misery, since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? And no one has the power over the wind to contain it. So no one has the power over the time of their death. As no one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. Now there's several different thoughts in here in what we just read. First of all, he says, there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighed down by misery. We studied that back in verse chapter 3, you might remember, a number of weeks ago. Remember, there is a time to every purpose under heaven. I played you the video, or the song up here from the Birds. There is a time to every purpose under heaven. So Solomon's reminding us to that here. There's a proper time for everything in terms of how we work with the government. And then he says, a person may be weighed down by misery. There are times when we don't want to do it, but we may decide that the right thing to do is to do what the government asks us to do. Now he changes subjects in verse 7. He says, so no one knows the future. Who can tell someone else what to come? We have no idea what's going to happen in the future. We might think we do. I mean, certain things we're probably pretty sure of. We think the sun will come up tomorrow morning. Maybe not, but probably. Certain things we're pretty sure of in the future, but we don't know what the future is going to hold. A lot of things go into a lot of people making a lot of decisions, and God making a lot of decisions will determine what really happens in the future. So we have no way to know the future. A lot of people think they do, they don't. And who can tell someone else what's to come? So how can we tell somebody else this is what's going to happen to you in the future? We don't even know it for ourselves. We might think.
What AI does nowadays? Predict the future and tell us what's going to happen and how we'll put our money and...
You're talking to a guy who worked for IBM for 30 years, okay? So I understand computers. And I can tell you that computers are very smart today, way smarter than they were in my era when I was selling them. But they're still not at the point even that our own minds are at, much less at the point that God's mind is at. They are way, 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 way short of that today. AI is getting better. Computers are getting more powerful. They're trying to come up with things called quantum computers. So far they're failing. I won't say they're failing, but they're not succeeding. Those might give them the ability to get to that next level, but we don't even know that that will be true even with quantum computers. So AI has a long ways to go before it's going to get to anything like predicting the future.
Yeah, but man has always wanted to predict the future. So
absolutely. When I've taught prophecy classes, the question everybody always wants to know is, so when is Jesus coming back, right?
Yeah.
What's the date? We don't know. We have no idea. We know he's coming back, but we don't know when.
But isn't it common sense to say he will come when he wants to come?
Of course, he's God.
I don't have to worry about it.
Right, he's God, yeah. Okay, thank you for the question. No one has the power over the wind to contain it, that's obvious. No one has the power over the time of their death. So God's going to determine when we're done and when we come visit him, or when we come, not visit him, but when we come to see him. It's not our time to or it's not our decision to do that. Then he goes on with another interesting one. He says, as no one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. So when you're sitting in the trenches and all of a sudden you see the enemy coming up the hill with tanks at you, you can't just get up and run out of your trench and say, I don't think I'll fight today. I think I'll just move on. That's not what you sign up for when you join the military. You sign up to fight in that situation. So that's, and it was true in that time as well. People were expected to, if they were in the army, they were expected to fight and to potentially die if necessary. Wickedness will not release those who practice it. So, wickedness, a lot of the times people are in war because of wickedness on the part of one or both sides in that war. And that doesn't release you from the responsibility of fighting for your side once you've chosen that side and made that commitment. We move on now to verses 9 through, verses 9 through 10.
There was in your notes here, I underlined, we must endure what is placed before us. And I think sometimes, and I think I ran into this years on, and I actually become really sick and ill over the situation. There's things in life that you can't control, and you need that heavenly wisdom.
Yeah, God
and
gives us
we on
endurance.
this earth are trying to do this, and people are sick, a lot of emotional, mental, angry, bitter, all those kinds of things, and it really tears a person down. Where if you were in that earth sunny wisdom in heaven, and just pray and ask God to help you deal with these things, which I had way back when.
Yeah.
God healed me, and I'm a much better person for that, but yeah. I mean, that really spoke to me there when you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was telling Deb here earlier on the way in this morning, just a few days ago, I was talking with a 17-year-old college freshman at a Christian college. So she's a believer. And I was asking her, so how are things going with Gen Z today? She's a Generation Z person. And she said there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, and then she went on, I said, so what do you think's causing that? She said, well, two things. One of them is they don't know God, and she's at a Christian college, so she's a believer. But she said number two is social media, which is very different. My question really was, why is there more of it now than there was 20 years ago? The answer is social media. It's amazing what percentage of teenagers are on anxiety drugs today. Yeah. And it's part of it's not knowing God, but the other part is social media. So if you're out there listening and you're on anxiety drugs, think about getting God and think about getting less social media. Other questions?
You're trying to get wisdom under the sun, right? I mean,
yeah. Everything on social media is almost everything on my class isn't, but almost everything else on social media is under the sun. Yes, I'm kidding. But there are lots of good Christian things out there on social media as well. Yeah. But most of it, 99% of it's under the sun. Other questions? Okay, let's move on. Let's move to verses 9 through 10. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. Then too I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless. So he's getting so discouraged with everything that he says, all right, maybe I just need to keep my mind focused on things that are under the sun. Since I can't understand this with my own wisdom, maybe I need to do that. I don't think that's really the right idea, by the way. I think we need to study this book so we do try to get a better understanding of the wisdom that's up here. But he's saying, I'll give up on that. I'll give up on it. I won't even try. I'll worry about studying this wisdom down here, the wisdom that's under the sun. Then he says, there is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. So many people that are on power trips in this world, whether they be leaders, kings, rulers, congressmen, dictators, whatever. So many people that are on various power trips over this world think that it's going to make them feel so much better to be able to control other people. They don't realize, and of course those people are going to pay a price for it, the people that get controlled. But don't they realize that it's also ruining them as well? I wonder how many people realize what it's doing to them to do that, what it's doing to them in terms of their relationship with God when they try to do that, when they try to exert control over other people. It's hurting them as well. It's not just hurting the other people. I'm sure they don't think about that, but I think we have so many people in this world that are on power trips that just want to make you do something else. And many of them want to be in our government. Then he talks about, then too I saw the wicked get buried. So in Jewish custom, the idea was to get buried, you get buried with honor. So the wicked get buried with honor too. Well, that's because they have money and power and they have people that'll do it for them. So this is bothering him, the idea that wicked people can get honors, even though they're wicked. He's having problems with the fact that wickedness is down here on earth, but they're getting what he views as heavenly honors at their burial. They're getting it even though they're wicked. Why? Why is that happening? And he's going on to say, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise. Well, the holy place is a very specific place in the temple that is inside the temple. So to be in there, you have to be a priest, or there are certain times of year when some other folks can get in there, but pretty much you have to be a priest or a Levite to get in there. So even people that are well regarded in the community can be evil, and they still can come and go in there, and they can be evil but still get glory and honor among the people. In an under the sun basis, they're still getting glory and honor. So why are they getting glory and honor when they're evil people and they're allowed to go into God's holy place? Why are evil people allowed to go into God's holy place? Stephen, you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. They receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless. Let's move on now to verses 11 through 13. I don't know what that is. Somebody's car. Okay. Verses 11 through 13. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, so he's changing subjects here. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better for those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. Good job here, Solomon. You're thinking a little bit above the sun here in this one. Okay? So there is something else meaningless that occurs here on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve. So how often do we see good people get treated badly in our world? It happens all the time, right? People get incarcerated for things they didn't commit. Whatever. We see a lot of that. People lose money because somebody defrauded them. Some evil person called them up and sold them something and defrauded them. It happens all the time in our world. We see it, and it bothers us. It really bothers us to think that people who are good, godly people are being taken advantage of by other people who are wicked, who are deliberately trying to take advantage of them. That bothers us when we see it. Why? Why is that happening? Why does God allow that? And he said, and the converse of it is true as well, that the wicked can get what the righteous deserve. So the righteous can get what the wicked should get, and the wicked can get what the righteous should get. So it can work both ways. People who are wicked can make billions of dollars. I wonder sometimes how many of our billionaires in the world are really righteous people. I do know one or two that are, but I'm not sure. I don't know them, but I know of them. But I wonder how many of the billionaires in our world are really truly righteous people. So that's another interesting question. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, so why does God allow wicked people? Why doesn't he just strike them dead? Why does he allow wicked people to go on and live to be 100 years old, right? But he does. He has his purposes. Why? And Solomon can't understand this. We can't either, by the way. You have to have above the sun wisdom and say it's God's plan. That's what he intends. He has a bigger plan that we don't understand. I know that it will go better for those who fear God, who are reverent before them. So good job, Solomon. Now he's finally saying, okay, people who fear God, and here he's using fear. Remember, the Hebrew word for fearing God, there are two meanings for it. One meaning is, I'm afraid of him. He might kill me. He might send me to hell, right? That's one meaning. The other meaning is, I'm reverent toward him. That's another meaning in Hebrew for fearing God. This one is that meaning. The meaning, we looked at one last week that was fear. This one is the meaning of that Hebrew word is I'm reverent toward God. So he says, I know it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. So he knows that in the end, up here, people who fear God, people who are reverent toward God, who are with God, are going to do better in the end. He knows that. He somehow he knows that. He just doesn't see it here on earth, which none of us do. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, because the wicked are not reverent, they don't love God, it will not go well for them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. So the wicked, it's not going to go well for them in the end. And Solomon, every now and then we see flashes where Solomon's getting it. He's getting it here, right? He's getting the fact that wicked people in the end are not going to do well. They're not going to end up in heaven. They're not going to end up here with God. He's getting that. He's just so frustrated with his inability to understand stuff down here. But every now and then we see that he does understand what's going on up there. He says their days will not lengthen like a shadow. So if you think about when you're walking down the block, your shadow can lengthen as you're walking. And he's thinking about their days may be lengthening here on earth. They may have long lives here on earth. They may live to be 100 here, but this is a gnat's eyelash of time compared to eternity. And their days will not lengthen eternally. And eternity is kind of a tough concept for him. It's a tough concept for Jews. They don't get it the same way we do. So he's saying he knows that afterwards something else is coming and it's not going to be good for them. I'm going to stop it there. We still have 4 more verses to go. We'll do those next week. Any questions on any of this? Okay. Well, for those of you at home, thank you for joining us this week. We pray you're going to have a good week this week, and we pray God will be with you, and we pray that your hearts are getting ready for the Christmas season. Thank you.